By the time the CEO fired Marcus Reed, the machine was already running behind him. The massive industrial arm moved with perfect precision, lifting a steel component that weighed nearly 2 tons, while the man who had designed its most critical system stood outside the glass wall with a cardboard box in his hands. Marcus had spent 11 years building that machine from the ground up, but nobody in the room seemed to care. The CEO only saw an older black engineer with worn shoes and tired eyes, not the genius who had quietly saved the company millions of dollars. Marcus Reed was 42 years old and had learned early that talent did not always speak louder than appearances. He lived in a modest neighborhood outside Detroit with his 12-year-old daughter, Amara, and worked at Titan Core Robotics, one of Michigan's fastest-growing industrial technology companies. Marcus was not the kind of engineer who spent his days bragging about patents or competing for attention. He arrived before sunrise, checked every system twice, and left on time whenever he could, because his daughter was waiting for him. Since his wife had passed away several years earlier, Marcus had become both father and mother to Amara. Every morning he packed her lunch before driving to work, and every afternoon he called her before heading home. His job was not simply a career. It was the reason he could keep a roof over their heads and give his daughter the future her mother had dreamed about. Titan Core's pride and joy was a revolutionary automated manufacturing machine called the Atlas system. It could move enormous metal components with an accuracy so precise that competitors had spent years trying to reproduce it. Marcus had designed the original control architecture, solved its dangerous overheating problem, and created the emergency braking system that made the machine safe enough for commercial production. Yet after Titan Core hired a new CEO named Richard Vail, Marcus slowly found himself pushed into the background. Richard was young, wealthy, polished, and obsessed with making Titan Core look like a modern company. He brought in a group of highly paid engineers from Silicon Valley and began replacing experienced workers with younger employees who had impressive resumes but little knowledge of the Atlas system. Marcus tried to stay professional. He trained the new engineers, shared his technical notes, and even warned them about a vibration problem inside the machine's main actuator. But his warnings were dismissed. One afternoon, Richard called Marcus into his office and told him the company was moving in a different direction. Marcus knew exactly what that meant. Richard praised the new engineers as a better fit for the future and said Titan Core needed people with fresh energy and modern thinking. Marcus listened quietly as his entire career was reduced to a few polite sentences. When Richard handed him the
termination papers, Marcus looked at the envelope for several seconds before taking it. He thought about Amara's school tuition. He thought about their mortgage. He thought about the medical bills he had paid after his wife's illness. Most painfully, he thought about the promise he had made at his wife's funeral that he would never let their daughter feel alone. Marcus walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box containing a coffee mug, a framed photograph of Amara, and a small metal model of the Atlas system he had built with his own hands. Nobody stopped him. Nobody asked how he felt. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected against the glass windows of Titan Core, while Marcus sat in his car and fought back tears. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He had learned that when life becomes unbearable, sometimes you simply grip the steering wheel and keep breathing. For the next several weeks, Marcus applied for engineering jobs across Michigan and beyond. Some companies rejected him without interviews. Others said he was overqualified. One recruiter suggested he should consider less technical leadership roles. Marcus knew what that really meant. At home, he hid his frustration from Amara. He still made pancakes on Saturday mornings, still helped her with math homework, and still smiled when she talked about becoming an aerospace engineer someday. But after she went to bed, Marcus would sit at the kitchen table surrounded by bills and job applications, wondering how much longer he could keep everything together. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, Marcus received a phone call that changed everything. Titan Core's Atlas system had stopped. Not one machine, all of them. The company had just signed a major contract with a national manufacturing corporation. and the failure threatened millions of dollars in penalties. The new engineering team had worked through the night but could not identify the problem. Richard Vail was furious. He called in specialists from 3 states, yet every diagnostic report pointed in a different direction. Then one engineer discovered something buried inside the original technical documentation: Marcus's name. The problem was exactly what Marcus had warned them about months earlier: the actuator. Vibration was causing a microscopic timing error that eventually triggered a cascading shutdown. The new engineers had never understood the relationship because the original safety system had been designed around Marcus's proprietary control logic. Richard finally understood the truth. The man he had fired as outdated was the only person who completely understood the machine. Richard drove to Marcus's house that afternoon. Marcus opened the door wearing an old sweatshirt while Amara sat at the kitchen table doing homework. Richard looked uncomfortable. For the first time, the powerful CEO stood in front of Marcus without a boardroom, expensive suit, or corporate title protecting him. He admitted the company needed Marcus immediately. He offered him his old position back, a significant raise, and authority over the entire engineering division. Marcus listened carefully. Then he asked Richard one question: "Do you need me because you finally recognize my value, or because you discovered what happens when you remove the person who built the foundation?" Richard had no easy answer. Marcus agreed to return, but not for revenge. He returned because hundreds of workers depended on TitanCore, because the company's failure could destroy families, and because he refused to let his daughter learn that injustice should stop someone from doing what is right. The next morning, Marcus walked through TitanCore's doors again. Some employees looked embarrassed. Others applauded quietly. The new engineers who had replaced him stood nearby, humbled. Marcus did not insult them. Instead, he gathered everyone around the Atlas system and began explaining the problem. Within hours, the machine was running again. But the greatest victory happened later that evening when Marcus returned home. Amara was waiting at the kitchen table with a handmade drawing of her father standing beside a giant machine. At the top, she had written, "My dad builds things that help people." Marcus stared at the drawing, and tears filled his eyes. He realized the company had once made him feel replaceable, but his daughter had reminded him of something far more important. A person's worth is not determined by who gives them a job title. Marcus eventually became TitanCore's chief engineering director and established a mentorship program for young engineers from overlooked communities. He never forgot what happened, and he made sure the next generation would have opportunities that depended on talent rather than assumptions. Sometimes justice does not arrive with shouting, lawsuits, or revenge. Sometimes it arrives when the person everyone underestimated becomes the one everyone desperately needs. What would you have done if you were Marcus Walkaway forever, or return and prove your worth? Share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments.